illusion. Under any illusion. I have a great deal of respect for the white race. They look out for themselves. I ain't got no problem with that. Don't think no fools held us in check for no 362 years. No fools held this great race of ours down for no 300. They're smart people. Don't play them cheap. Don't play them cheap. We have a very formidable enemy here. And they're very amenable and very nice. How are you? Can I help you with your bag? How do that? Let's understand this. We're not dealing with those people who curse you out, who make you mad. On the contrary, they'll make you feel better. Bobby, they are better friends than my blacks. Yeah. That's mental side. And we must become that way. We must become civil. We must become, how are you? How are you doing? Thank you very much for a minute store. Can I help you with that? The objective is to win. We got to win. We're talking about winning now. We're not talking about, in a horse race, you can win, place, and show. Most blacks want to show. I want to win. I would say the other thing we must do, the whites have written our history in blood, are writing our history in blood. We must at least write theirs in ink. You must begin to write. You must begin to write about your experiences and put them in your Bible. Put them in your books. Pass them on to your children. Say, pass this on. Pass this on. One thing we've found out, the oral tradition does not work. It gets distorted. We must write down what's happening to us. Because the history they're writing in this university has nothing to do with reality. Nothing to do with reality. And so, in ending, I would like to say, so we can take some questions, that I really appreciate the type of love you've shown me throughout the years. If you think that tonight I was showing you something that there is no hope, then that's not true. You misunderstood. It's just that the only way, I was telling the brothers tonight about, I rarely quote other people, because that's the problem. Every time you look up, brothers and sisters are quoting somebody else other than black people. But Fanon said it, and I like to quote Fanon because he is black, that there comes a time when silence is dishonest. When silence is dishonest. And we cannot remain silent any longer. I realize what's happening now around the country now with people like me and others is we're becoming isolated. There's a move on now to divide the black community along class levels. To tell black people that the problem is not race, it's class. That those bourgeois blacks up there have more in common with whites than they have with you at the bottom. And it's a thing that we're going to have to deal with. We cannot ignore it any longer. Books are being written by it. And it's going to especially affect the black student, because the black student is a paradox. The black student finds himself on a college campus where he is being trained to be a professional. And the strange thing about it is, very ones who give you the class analysis, guess who they quote? They quote people like Castro, who is a doctor. Che Guevara, who's a medical doctor. Marx, who was a German Jew, an intellectual, a PhD. Lenin, German Jew, intellectual, PhD. Ho Chi Minh, who was a school teacher, and have nothing good to say about a black professional. Won't quote a black professional at all about nothing. And so our black students are being bombarded with this, and our best minds are being wiped out because they cannot see the relevancy of being trained at the University of Washington. University of Washington will train you. They will not educate you. They will train you, and we need that training. But we must be educated with each other through seminars like this. We must educate ourselves. They are not fools. Why should they educate us to destroy them? Educated people are dangerous people. You cannot enslave uneducated people. That's why the Germans will never be enslaved. That's why even the Jews will never be enslaved, contrary to what they talk about. You're not going to enslave the Jews. You're not going to enslave the Japanese. That's out of the question, because they have a national will. Not only do they have a national will, they have a national intelligence. And you would never enslave them. Thinking people, educated people are always plotting while you sleep on how to get out, on how to kill you. Only uneducated people, only trained people accept their fate as being God's will. There's a better life after death. In suffering, there's redemption. That's menticide. And so we must begin to teach ourselves, even if you don't like each other. And we must make a pact here tonight. A pact. Say, okay, brother, how far can I go with you? Let's see what we agree on, not what we disagree on. What do we agree on? What do we agree on? See, but we don't start there. We just start on what we disagree on. I don't like your analysis, man. No, did you agree on anything I said? I don't like your analysis. I don't like you. Those are the facts. And then, as I was saying, I really appreciate this. And I like to leave with this word here. Our black mission is very clear. We are men and women of destiny. We are. And our task is to develop a social theory. That's our task. To develop a social theory which will liberate the minds and bodies of our people. We must take an unequivocal position that if the black race is to perish, the world must perish with us. We must take that position now. 30 million black people in this country must take that position. That if this world is to perish, that if we are to perish, the world is going to perish with us. We're not going to be Indians. We ain't going out like they went out. No, somebody's going to pay a price. The other thing we must do, and this becomes tricky, because here's where you lose a lot of people. This is my position, that blood debts must be paid in blood. Blood debts must be repaid in blood. Somebody must pay for 362 years. Somebody got to pay us for that. Somebody must pay for all the black generations that have died for no other reason they were black and are dying today. Somebody got to pay for that.
Greetings, everyone. The date is February 3rd, 2025, and white people are still in charge. We just heard from Dr. Bobby Wright. Today we're going to be discussing the introduction and chapter 1 of the Psychopathic Racial Personality and other essays by Dr. Bobby E. Wright. Jumping straight into it, I want to inform folks who may not be aware of who Dr. Bobby Wright is. So this is from the introduction. Dr. Wright was born in one of the oldest all-black communities in the United States, Hobson City, Alabama. He attended both elementary and high school there. His grandfather was one of the founders of Hobson City. These events undoubtedly contributed to his positive self-image and race consciousness. His professional career was outstanding. He was a truant officer, a teacher, college educator, school psychologist, mental health administrator, clinical psychologist, researcher, consultant, author, and computer expert. He was known locally, nationally, and internationally for his technical skills as well as his commitment to the progress of black people. He believed in the sanctity of the black family, and his dedication to his wife and his son was exemplary. At the time of his death in 1982, Dr. Wright was director of the Garfield Park Comprehensive Community Health Center in Chicago. Under his leadership, this mental health center, which now bears his name, became the largest totally black-controlled freestanding mental health center in the United States. Long live the spirit, memory, and inspiration of Bobby E. Wright. And this is by Esther O. Wright. So, in this text, the Psychopathic Racial Personality, Dr. Bobby Wright discusses his theories and concepts on what we are dealing with here on planet Earth 2025, and have been dealing with for, some would say, hundreds of years. Some will also say thousands of years. And he begins the first paragraph with an analogy. I'm going to read the analogy and then give my thoughts on it. He says here, this is page 1 of the Psychopathic Racial Personality. In a bullfight, after being brutalized while making innumerable charges at the movement of a cape, there comes a time when the bull finally turns and faces his adversary, with the only movement being his heaving, bloody sides. It is believed that for the first time he really sees the matador. This final confrontation is known as the moment of truth. For the bull, this moment comes too late. So with this analogy, I'm reminded of the system of white supremacy and how it functions. It produces a lot of distractions and traps for black people to fall in. And it's not until, if it ever does happen, where we realize that the harm, the damage that's being done to us is because of white people and their system. If we ever do realize that, it is because we have been either placed in greater confinement, or we have spent our entire lives in misery, having conflict with other black people, or we get brutalized by what people call police officers, what we call in the counter-racist scientific circle as race soldiers. We get brutalized by them. Then we realize, we're dealing with an entire system that is designed to make us miserable, designed to harm us, and designed to confuse us. And maybe that's when the moment of truth comes for us, when it's too late. If we are the bull and this analogy, and this system and white people are the matadors. They have been distracting us and confusing us and bamboozling us for hundreds of years, and those hundreds of years are thoroughly documented by white people and some black scholars who have attempted to solve and counter this problem. So we're dealing with what Dr. Bobby Wright calls a psychopath. And we in this system, we often use that term, but it's not as thoroughly defined as Dr. Bobby Wright does here. Actually, in this system, it's actually kind of glamorized to be a psychopath. We have shows like Dexter, Nip Tuck, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which kind of glamorizes psychopathic behavior, just not caring about people and only caring about yourself, and selfishness. It kind of glamorizes that sort of thing. So I'm going to find where he defines it, and then we're going to go from there. It's on page 2 of the text. And it says here, this presentation is based upon the following very simple premise. In their relationship with the black race, Europeans, whites, are psychopaths, and their behavior reflects an underlying biologically transmitted proclivity with roots deep in their evolutionary history. The psychopath is an individual who is constantly in conflict with other persons or groups. He is unable to experience guilt, is completely selfish and callous, and has a total disregard for the rights of others. This premise is supported by overwhelming scientific evidence. Delaney, Du Bois, Fanon, Garvey, Boesing, Williams. There is a scientific dictum which states everything that exists in some amount, and if it exists, it can be measured. One of the best methods that can be used in one of the best methods that can be used to measure the psychopathic traits of the white race is observing and analyzing their universal overt behaviors and attitudes towards blacks. However, in doing so, since blacks have been enslaved and colonized by whites, a very subtle psychological problem is posed of which every black should be aware. Intellectual insight about whites does not ensure that there will be a corresponding change in blacks' behavior and attitude towards white, particularly when there is a threat involved. So this is where he defines what we are dealing with, the white psychopath, the white race as a collective being psychopathic in their relationship to black people. And this is, to me, this is very obvious because wherever there are black people on the planet, we are, from my observation, in a very pitiful, miserable state. Even when there's a handful of us in very, very comfortable positions, most of us are in a pitiful position, in poverty, and if we're not in poverty, we are just utterly confused about what we should be doing on this planet. He also states that, continue on page 2, and this is why I started off the broadcast with white people are still in charge, because he says here, for example, everywhere one finds whites and blacks in close proximity to each other, whether it is Chicago or Zimbabwe, the whites are in control. Yet blacks rarely question this extraordinary universal phenomenon, which defies every known statistical law of probability. In fact, blacks denounce those who simply raise the question with admonitions such as, we should not be racist and treat them as they have treated us. In fact, whites are not going to allow blacks to treat them as they have treated blacks. So that requires no discussion. So he says that no matter where we are on this planet, white people are still in charge. And this theoretically should be impossible. But because the system of white supremacy is very real and very powerful, it has literally dominated all black people worldwide. There's no place on the planet where black people rule over white people. It simply does not happen on this planet. It cannot happen while white people are still in charge. I'm not saying it should happen. It's not going to happen. And the goal, that should not be the goal. The goal should be justice, guaranteeing no one is allowed to be mistreated, and the people who need help receive help. So I'm going to pause there to see if other folks would like to share some of their notes before I continue on.
One part that I thought was interesting is on page 1. It says, however, with technology and worldwide industrialization on the rampage, resulting in a further exploitation of Africa's resources, which in turn produces an increase in Africa's blacks' national consciousness. Blacks are now a threat and a liability to the white race, and the banner held by the matador represents only one concept: genocide. That line really, I don't know. When I read it, I highlighted it because I thought, especially I thought him highlighting technology and worldwide industrialization, it reminded me, of course, of the iPhones and the lithium and cobalt mining. It reminded me a lot of, the other day I was looking up Ghana in West Africa. Their exports, and I noticed that like almost all of the exports are like cocoa, oil. It's or not oil, but like the petroleum or but a lot of their exports are like raw materials. They don't actually do any processing in that country. So they don't have the technology, the capability to actually process their raw materials. All they can do is sell them to white people, which I thought was really interesting because it says a lot about how they, I guess, like retard us because we have a lot of resources, um, and it's a lot easier to basically remove any ability to utilize those resources and build infrastructure to process those resources. Because every time, obviously, a black person wants to nationalize their industries or start producing things for their own people, then it causes a big issue. White people come and they kill the president and they start a coup and lots of people die. So I thought that was interesting. And I also thought about with technology and worldwide industrialization, I thought about weaponry and how a lot of African countries get even more flooded with all of these advanced weaponry to kill each other, and how that's, like a form of genocide because obviously they're not producing these weapons in these countries. They're getting flooded with them, like it's happening in the country known as Sudan right now. A lot of white countries are providing weaponry to the different armies that are fighting each other, causing like essentially a genocide, causing people to starve. So I thought that that part really resonated with me because it seems like it's a tactic that's been used for a long time, but it's very sad that as technology gets more advanced, it's really just being used to cause more subjugation and exploitation of Black people. The other part, I think the sentence after that, it says, white scientists are involved with today. Oh, yeah, is genocidal in nature. Examples: nuclear warfare, population control, medication control, genetic engineering, psychosurgery, electrical stimulation of the brain, and the highly complex science of behavioral technology. Um, yeah, I thought when I read that, I thought about, remember like Neuralink with Elon Musk when he was implanting chips into like chimpanzees' brains. I I just thought it was so interesting. I mean, it's all stuff that we know, but I remember when I was in college and there was a nuclear engineering program, and everyone and or a lot of the people who were in that program were from Israel, and they were like white people from Israel, and I was always like, that's so interesting that they're not from like like that they're getting these people and providing them with this knowledge, like nuclear engineering, what are they going to do with this information? So I thought that was really interesting how they know where to invest their resources. And obviously, with population control, I mean, that's something that is constantly being done when it comes to just um, like in the country known as Israel, for example, like they um what is that word? I forgot the word, but I'm sorry, they prevent because there's a Ethiopian Jewish population, so there's Black Jewish people who live in Israel, and the women, they prevent them from giving birth. Like they, it's similar to what was done
Do they
in
sterilize them?
America. What'd you say?
They, They
Yeah, they
sterilize
sterilized
them.
the Jews. Yeah, that was the word I needed. Yeah, they sterilized the Ethiopian Jews, which is when you think about it, it makes it so obvious that the whole formation of that country is just like a white supremacist breeding, like within that area of the world project. Because why would they sterilize these people if it's supposed to be a Jewish state? But it's obvious because it's not a Jewish state. It's a white supremacist state. Um, the other part that I thought was interesting, I think you already brought it up, where you said the psychopath is an individual who is constantly in conflict with other persons or groups. He is unable to experience guilt, is completely selfish and callous, and has a total disregard for the rights of others. I thought that was the very accurate and makes sense in terms of how white people function in society, in terms of like the way that our society functions in such an inefficient and callous manner because people do not want to provide resources or any sort of ease to other people. There's so much selfishness. Like, I was watching a video about how they were taking away, I think they were making people work if they have Medicaid in Arkansas. There's like a new law. And all the comments are just people like saying, oh, like that's what they deserve. People are getting a free ride. Mind you, like, I don't know how someone else getting health insurance would bother you. You should just like be advocating for everyone to have it, but instead it's like this constant conflict of like, well, I don't want them to have it. The idea of like taking something away from people, especially people who may be like more vulnerable. I thought that was interesting. That's all I'll say for now.
I found the quote or a quote on page 12 through 13. Very interesting. There is no evidence that the black and white races can live in close proximity to each other in peace without whites attempting to oppress and exterminate blacks. And then further down on page 13, blacks are at war with psychopaths. Violence is the only way. I see this as being black people are not being violent towards people who are being violent towards them because of dangerous behavioral patterns. In one part of the book, he says some black people's response to this uh, basically racist oppression, is to go catatonic, not respond, and wait for divine intervention. Um, Another quote that was interesting to me on page 7, the psychopath is usually sexually inadequate with very little, or excuse me, with very limited capacity to form close interpersonal relationships. This reminded me of the book I read a while back on uh, Them and Us about Neanderthal predation theory, where early humans in the area known as the Levant were hunted and raped by a group of Neanderthals that survived the Ice Age. So, in order for these humans to survive, some of them essentially became psychopaths, and that led to the genocide of Neanderthals. This is the theory. And so, in order, basically, psychopaths' purpose is to exterminate. Their purpose is violence, whether direct or indirect. So, understanding that going catatonic is not optional. You need to engage in counter violence directly and indirectly.
I also had that part highlighted, and it just that part alone, the inadequacies that they have in in area 8, sex, that's really like, if we actually observe and study white culture, what white people are doing in the bedroom, they do things like they'll have someone like a married white couple will pay a black male to have sex with their wife. And I've seen interviews on this stuff, and they see it as an act of love. Like, it's an act of love for them to pay a black male to have sex with a white man's wife while the husband watches. Because that is just that derangement, that psychopathy, and that sickness that we are dealing with. And they have a whole it's called cucking, I believe. And he mentions how they go like streaking, and they have like all these orgies, and in the effort to feel something in the area of sex, of actual affection. And that simply may just be lost to some white people due to their psychopathy, due to their like century effort to maintain violence and to dominate the planet. Perhaps a symptom of that is just a lot of the feelings that we have, that black people have, is simply they no longer have, or perhaps they never had them, which is why they've been able to just be so callous and vile towards black people and all people on this planet that they don't classify as white. I also had here, it was on page 3, and he talks about how we fail, how a lot of our black scholars just fail to adequately discuss what we are dealing with on planet Earth. And he says here on page 3, black intellectual enlightenment does not always lead to genuine insight, and it can be very damaging to the intellect, as reflected by the behavior and attitudes of many eminent black scientists. For example, Dr. Kenneth B. Clark has spent his life making a fortune studying the victims of white oppression, his own people, and now speaks to the irrelevancy of color. Dr. Alvin Passant, who seems to be Johnson Publishing Company's psychiatrist in residence, ignores the widespread genocidal program directed against blacks and writes such trivia as the difference between sex and love, blacks and Jews, and appeal for unity, and why blacks kill blacks. Blacks kill blacks because they have never been trained to kill whites. Therefore, it is outside their experience. Historically, the European system has encouraged the killing of blacks because blacks have been led to believe that they are part of the psychopath system. They simply follow the practice. So that's him arguing against Passant's text, why blacks kill blacks, which is very significant, because we it's often that talking point, that argument. Well, blacks kill each other. A white person will say that to justify why they should be allowed to continue killing blacks, or to justify why black people should not get the help that they desperately need. It's very, very tragic, but I love that Dr. Bobby Wright, simply puts, blacks kill blacks because we have never been trained to kill whites. And that's not gonna help the system if we are taught how to kill people who have been killing us since they have encountered us on this planet. So no, we are I saw a video just today of black children, can't be more than 10 years old, walking around wearing ski masks, throwing up gang signs, talking about how they created the gang. And those blacks have certainly already been trained to harm each other, and that is what the system is all about. Maintaining itself, maintaining the status quo. And the status quo is black people are worthy of death, it's okay for black people to kill other black people. Because when that happens, we have one less black person on this planet, and we also have more black people to lock up in greater confinement, aka the prison system. So that was really, really significant, I thought. And also he discusses how when this sort of rhetoric is published, first of all, it's very hard to go to the library and find the ISIS papers and to find psychopathic racial personalities, whereas certain black scholars are in every library. And it's because their texts aren't designed to solve this problem. Their texts aren't revealing what white culture is and what white people are up to. We are punished for studying white people, for revealing the truth about white people, and those texts are often hidden from black people who are seeking to understand like what's going on this planet. Because the problem is definitely not being able to, like, the problem is white people. It's not being able to. It's not the difference between sex. That's not the problem. The difference between sexes is not the problem. White blacks kill blacks is not the problem. It's actually very interesting. Also here on page 3, where it says Dr. James Comer is another black psychiatrist whom the psychopaths have so overwhelmed that he has moved, as his book suggests, beyond black and white. Cobbs and Greer follow this tradition of blacks studying themselves rather than oppressors by concluding in Black Rage that whites make blacks so mad that they kill themselves. And just sort of like, they will push this as a scientific or sociological study, and we have been, as Dr. Bobby Wright calls it, mental-sided. I like to call it. We have been so retarded by the system that we would actually believe this. We would actually believe that blacks kill each other because white people have made us so angry. Logic says, we direct anger at the source where you're angry, at the source that has made you angry. So if we are actually killing blacks because we're angry at white people, we would just harm white people, but that's not happening anywhere on this planet, as the evidence suggests. And we have here in 2025, our president is an actual, like, overt, conniving, lying psychopath who definitely doesn't care about seemingly anyone besides his fellow white supremacist cohort. And that he's just the prime example of what a psychopath is. He goes into a deeper, like, understanding, because like he breaks it down further on page 4, and I'm gonna read it and discuss it. He says here, in order to understand the psychopathic personality, one must differentiate between 3 classifications: the neurotic, the psychotic, and the psychopath. The definitions of psychopathology have been established and adhered to by the World Health Organization and International Classification of Diseases. The contributions of black people in determining these classifications are almost non-existent. Generally, the neurotic is a person who suffers a great deal over problems that are handled fairly routinely by a well-adjusted personality. We all probably know someone who may be a bit neurotic, especially if you have a white acquaintances. They like freak out over small things. They, so one thing goes wrong and they go into a panic, very dramatic lot of people. And then he continues on saying, the major problem for neurotics is their inordinate amount of anxiety. However, in contrast to the psychotic, the neurotic has very good reality contact. The psychotic, in addition to being out of touch with reality, has severe malfunctionings and many times has to be hospitalized for long periods of time. this leaves a psychopath. So when someone is psychotic, they like may have an episode where they go out and harm people and they get caught or something. They may have like it's like I would interpret it as being like bipolar, where you can clearly sense something is off with this person. But when we're talking about the psychopath, it's a whole different phenomenon, reality, I should say. This leaves a psychopath. Scientists agree that there is no science without classification. For the disciplines of psychology and medicine, it is not necessary for labels and diagnosis to have concrete reality. They can be retained if they are useful in understanding and treating disease. For example, the majority of patients who are admitted or committed to mental hospitals in this country are diagnosed with being schizophrenic. Although there is no general agreement among psychiatrists and psychologists on the definition of schizophrenia, however, even though it is not required, their presentation does have concrete reality. Namely, Europeans' behavior and attitudes toward blacks. Behavioral scientists generally agree that the outstanding characteristic of psychopathic personalities are almost complete absence of ethical or moral development and an almost total disregard for appropriate patterns of behavior. This characteristic has led to a misunderstanding of the psychopath as someone who does not know the difference between right and wrong. This belief is not true. Psychopaths simply ignore the concept of right and wrong. By ignoring this trait in the white race, the lack of ethical and moral development, blacks have made and are still making a tragic mistake in basing the worldwide black religion movement on moral suasion. It is pathological for blacks to keep attempting to use moral suasion on a people who have no morality where race is variable. Because of the lack of ethical and moral development, there is no conflict between the whites' religion and racial oppression. The white race has historically oppressed, exploited, and killed black people, all in the name of their God, Jesus Christ. With the sanction of their churches, it is generally overlooked that the Ku Klux Klan is primarily a religious organization. Further, blacks should never forget the image of the Pope blessing the Italian planes and pilots on their way to bombing Ethiopian men, women, and children who only had spears to defend themselves. So that is him exposing the psychopathic racial personality we are facing on planet Earth. This is why you can have millions of black people dying of starvation worldwide, while at the same time whites professing to be God's people here to make the world a better place. When it comes to dealing with black people, the main concern is keeping us in this degraded state and maintaining the status quo of white people being in charge, living while non-white people simply exist, and poverty, and I will also say total chaos, because our minds have been so poisoned and we just are totally confused, and we are taught that this is okay, that what we experience, being able to turn on the TV and there's a commercial, you see an emaciated black child, this is okay and this is normal. I have never turned on the TV and saw an emaciated white child and someone telling us to steal their money.
For Native American continue to be a powerful symbol.
So would anyone else like to share some notes before I continue going?
Yeah, just briefly, can I be heard okay?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So kind of going back to the earlier quote or text about, or I guess the latter part of it, but where he talks about blacks failing to study white people. Bottom of 3. Cobbs and Greer follow this tradition of blacks studying themselves rather than their oppressors by concluding in Black Rage that whites make blacks so mad that they kill themselves. Forgive me if you already read that. But black scientists generally rationalize their investigations as proof to white scientists that blacks can be scientifically objective. Before I continue with that, a black scientist who moves outside the psychopath's approved course of study takes the chance of being labeled unscientific, emotional, biased, etc. Additionally, funds are only available to black scientists who support the approved course of study themselves. This reminds me of basically the whole premise of Dr. Murrumbani's book, Urugu, which is an entire analysis, study, observation of white people and their culture. And what I was reminded of, kind of relevant now, there's a very, very popular, I'd imagine, channel show on YouTube, or the channel's called Jubilee. I'm sure we've all seen probably a clip 1 or 2 from that channel. They do a lot of discussions. They have topics. They'll even bring people, certain groups together, like atheists versus Christians, stuff like that. Total. But one thing that I've noticed about that channel, hundreds of videos, I'd say, I've never seen one video that is an analysis of white people. I've seen tons of videos where black people are the subject of discussion, the behaviors of black people, about the way black people think. I've seen topics such as Africans versus African Americans. I've seen topics even as guess who's the black person in the room, or guess who's not black, something like that. But I've never seen guess who's the white person in the room. Who's not the white person in the room? Or white Europeans versus white Americans. I've never seen anything like that, because what I suspect and believe is it kind of goes back to this quote that essentially an analysis of white people is not allowed and should not occur under any circumstances. I think every time when an attempt like that is made, it's shut down instantly. The funds are not produced for it, and so on and so forth. So I think I was looking at this book. It's probably going on almost 40 years ago, but a lot of this is still relevant today.
Thank you, Kwaku. Excellent observations. And yeah, this book was published at 1984, and everything is still pertinent to the year 2025. Very, very tragic, but this is the reality we must face if we are to achieve a better future for people classified as blacks. He goes furthermore into and truly, if we just understand what has been done to black people and history, we read Delectable. Actually, one of our first books was The Delectable Negro, and that just showed me how evil of a people we are dealing with. Just reading that book alone showed me, had me thinking, well, what kind of group of people eats, boils people alive? What kind of group of people does that? And this book right here, The Psychopathic Racial Personality, informs me, psychopaths can do this. Psychopaths do this and don't lose any sleep over it. Actually, they do it and rationalize it with their science, their theories, their doctrine, stuff we learned from Urugu. They have learned to rationalize their vileness and the acts of terror against black people. It says here on page 7, and this is just further revealing the psychopathy we're dealing with. It says here, whites sexual dysfunction has produced tragic consequences in the black community. They have attempted to achieve sexual gratification by such methods as raping black women. Their rationale is that black women are oversexed and invite their attention. Historically, the justification for castrating black men was their animal passions had to be contained. In 1893, Frank Lydston of Chicago, a white doctor, proposed that castration would conserve the energy of the black community. The sustained sexual atrocities committed against the black race by white race has no parallel in history, and there is no scientific explanation except under the rubric of psychopathology. There's no other way to justify what has been done to black people other than we are dealing with a total evil force in the manifestation of people who call themselves white and or psychopathology. Medical apartheid reveals so much. White psychopathy, white psychopathology. I suspect if you study that book and you see how they were experimenting on black people, black females, genitals, and you will just imagining that, you should be able to think, yeah, this group of people, they're not who they say they are. They're not honorable people. Quite the opposite. Quite decrepit. Quite vile. This is what the black collective and an effective number of black people should understand. And with that understanding will come behaviors and thought patterns that allow us to solve this problem. We will be able to counter this problem in all 9 areas of people activity, especially the most significant one, which is probably war. And he talks about how it is pathological. Like we exhibit. They call it generational trauma, and I think generational trauma is also that it's pathological. It's a sickness that makes us to think white people have somehow changed, that they're not how they used to be. It's the sickness that we still trust white people and trust them to solve our problem. We trust their religious teachings that have made us so docile. He says here on I think it was page 5. Ignoring the tree. Yeah, it says it is pathological for blacks to keep attempting. Oh, I just read that. And maybe that's why they have allowed religion to be so prominent amongst us, because they know that is what keeps us so docile, believing them and believing their religions and all that nonsense. And also, he mentions how white people are very nice. They're very kind. They're very courteous. They're very respectful. But that is a part of what it means to be a psychopath. You become a great actor. And they have all these sayings when a white person murders someone, and you hear all these people saying, "Oh, I would never have expected as him. I would never have expected that from him. He would never have heard it fly. I would have never guessed he could do something like that." The average black person probably isn't aware that white people used to boil black people in sugar and grease, and sometimes even eat them. The average black person probably will be a little surprised that when black people were lynched, white people would come chop off their genitals and other body parts and keep as souvenirs. They probably aren't aware of this because we're not allowed to learn this stuff, and we have not been given a will to want to understand and want to learn about history, what has been done to us by white people throughout history. Because once we start learning this stuff, then we should be motivated to understand why it has happened and what we can do to get justice, to maybe, like Dr. Bobby Wright calls it, how can this blood debt be paid? Something to think about for sure. He mentions just the total disarray of just black culture, black people. He says here on page 8, community mental health centers are in such disarray that space does not permit an adequate discussion. They are underfunded and therefore understaffed. With the usual staffing pattern consisting of all white professionals and all black low-paid non-professionals. Additionally, almost every existing center uses the medical model, i.e., the belief that the major problem is the black person without any regard to his circumstances or environment. And this is how white people want us to look at ourselves and look at the planet. They don't want us to connect dots. They don't want us to understand that, hey, maybe this person is acting incorrectly because they exist in a incorrect, unbalanced system, controlled, orchestrated, maintained by white people. And this person's behavior is exactly what the white people in charge want to happen, because it keeps their system going and it keeps the image of the black person being a beastly creature going. So, yeah, and this is very, very common. This is still occurring, and this book is very, very old, but the information is still very, very pertinent to today. He also continues, furthermore, community centers and government agencies are heavily influenced by the American Model Association, which is one of the most overtly racist and probably the most powerful organization in the United States. A very vicious funding game is played with black mental health centers, in which the U.S. government supplies funds, with the stipulation being that the black community must find matching funds. Needless to say, there are usually no matching funds for black mental health programs. Therefore, the funds revert back to the U.S. governments. So how does that? That's simply like the entire system itself, set up and designed to fail, designed to be inadequate, designed to help no one but white people. And he also says, we have been taught that, to place a great trust in the legal system, to trust the Supreme Court, to trust them to do the correct thing, which does not happen. He says here also on page 8, psychopaths also reject constituted authority and discipline. The presence of this trait in the white race has grave implications for blacks who seek legal solutions to their problems. This especially applies to the blacks in the United States, who are the world's only legally created group, created through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, which can be repealed at any moment by this Congress or declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. As long as this condition exists, black people are in the United States will always be legally 5 minutes away from slavery. It's something to think about, which is why we should not, the doctrine, what we learned in Urugu, like the writings white people use to help to maintain their system, is only serves white people. We should not have faith that it serves us. It simply does not. And a lot of movements that we have, we thought were helping us, has also sabotaged us. He mentions here on page 9 how how integration is an example of that. He says, as a result of the infamous 1954 school desegregation decision, blacks have lost an estimated 35,000 teaching and administrative positions in the South. Former black principals of black schools are now janitors in the integrated schools, and the same thing is going to happen to the black teachers in the North. Eventually, the Supreme Court is going to find the 1954 decision unconstitutional, but by that time, the whites will have taken over all of the black schools, including black colleges. So we already know how important it is for black children to have black teachers. I would say it's even more important for black children to have black teachers who are students of Dr. Francis Wilson, Dr. Almonson Wilson, Dr. Barbie Wright, so on and so forth. But it just goes to show you how white people literally are masters of deception, masters of sabotage. So I'm gonna pause there and see if folks have anything want to share their notes before I continue. Actually, evolutionists, are you still with us? Would you like to share?
I can share while he's on page 8, where he says blacks are held responsible for the deterioration of their communities, even though all of the property is white controlled. In addition, municipal services are withdrawn from black communities, and most of these communities have been used up, before blacks are allowed to move into them. I thought that part was interesting because I think sometimes black people will be confused and feel like they have ownership of certain places. Like they will have wars and they will kill each other over streets that are not even theirs. And if, they don't have the capacity to act or the power to actually make those streets their own. And there are a lot of places where it's majority black people, and you can see the landlords make sure to, or not make sure to, but they do not put forth any effort into making the place habitable, making it free from rodents or things like that. And then it'll be that, oh, well, these people will think that, oh, these people are just dirty, oh, these people can't clean. But you could have a clean house, and if there's space for these rodents to move around, they may not go into your home to get food or something, but they'll go through it to get to other places. And when places are not kept up, when the infrastructure is not kept up, it really produces a defeated mindset when you walk outside and everything has cracks, nothing is kept together, things are constantly broken. And then you can drive a couple blocks away and things are lined with trees. And even just having trees provides shade, provides cleaner air, all things that, are taken away. That type of access is taken away from white people. So I thought that was really interesting. And then when he says the presence or psychopaths also reject constituted authority and discipline. The presence of this trait in the white race has grave implications for Blacks who seek legal solutions to their problems. This especially applies to the Blacks in the United States. I think you read this earlier, but I just thought that that part was interesting because I think a lot of people still get angry or still feel like there was, I think they say like there was they didn't, justice like wasn't produced in this situation. But I think really understanding that the laws are not concrete, they're not something that people just always abide by. The laws are based off of like whatever is convenient for white people. So if there's a shooting and there's a lot of people causing disruption in the street, okay, then maybe in this case we'll enforce the law and put this police officer in prison. But there's going to be like 400 probably people who are killed by police who will get away with it because the law is just convenience. I was reading an article about Henry Kissinger and how he was in Angola, or he when Angola was trying to separate themselves from the Portuguese, and they had this agreement between the different political factions in Angola, and the U.S. said, "Okay, we support this. You know, we're not going to fund any weapons or any wars, and we support your peace agreement." But behind that, they were actually funding and sending weapons to one group of like one political group in Angola. So I think what confuses a lot of Black people sometimes is they argue based off of the idea that like white people are playing by the same rules that they should play by, but there aren't rules for them. There's just conveniences. That's all I have to say for now.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to share some of their notes before we conclude?
I did have, I guess, one question for the group, kind of seeking clarification and just getting other people's thoughts on this statement. But on page 2, I was trying to read. I don't want to read the whole paragraph. It needs content. On the last part, says there's a scientific dictum which states everything that exists in some amount, and if it exists, it can be measured. One of the best methods that can be used to measure the psychopathic traits of the white race is observing and analyzing their universal overt behaviors and attitudes towards Blacks. However, in so doing, since Blacks have been enslaved and colonized by whites, a very subtle psychological problem is posed of which every Black should be aware. Intellectual insight about whites does not ensure that there will be a corresponding change in Blacks' behavior and attitude toward whites, particularly when there is a threat involved. My question, or I guess I was just trying to see what other people think, is that last part about intellectual insight about white does not ensure that there will be a corresponding change in Blacks' behavior. I guess I'm somewhat confused by the statement. I guess I just kind of want to know more about, what exactly are you trying to say here? I mean, he does provide an example afterwards, but is one way to interpret this, by studying and doing the observing of whites, that the behavior of so-called blacks will not change, or I don't know.
I think maybe he's saying that you can make it put forth effort to study them and analyze them, but some people can just stop there and don't actually change their behavior and don't actually do the work to build a critical mass of people. I think that maybe that's what I was interpreting it as, is that you can observe them and analyze them in the academic sense, and it's very good to do that. But some people, like there's people who will, for instance, like Dr. Wilson, Bobby, Wright, Amos, and Wilson, they didn't just write books and analyze. They were constantly giving speeches or talking at different Black centers, and they were also doing psychiatry work. So they were changing behaviors. They were providing information to people. They weren't just analyzing it and then being siloed and not actually, because some people are fearful. They can know about this stuff, but not want to actually talk about it or change their own actions because maybe they fear some sort of retribution because white people are so powerful. So that's how I interpreted it.
Let's see. Yeah. Before anybody else adds, so I guess kind of just assuming, right? But in Dr. Walsing's case, a psychiatrist, say you work in the field of psychiatry, you originally didn't know about this type of information, then you become aware of it, then maybe applying it to your practice or how you address your patients, how you interact with your patients, things like that, right? But I guess kind of what you were saying, probably failing to do that, rather just reading the books, consuming the information, and just kind of that's as far as that goes. I don't know if anybody else has any other thoughts.
Yes, I agree with the assessments made. I equate it to learning about the United Independent Compensatory Code System concept, such as listening to Mr. Fuller's speeches, but then choosing not to create your own code to produce a system of justice, or using or deliberately ignoring any of his suggestions. So that's what I saw it as. Just having the information isn't enough. It doesn't mean you're going to use it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, the action part sometimes. Well, thought speech action. Well, that was the only question I had. I appreciate that. Developing your own code. Yeah. Once you get the information, doing something with it. And I guess that was I just found that part to be kind of interesting. I don't really have anything else to say about that. Thanks for your guys' views and thoughts. I don't know if 05 was gonna add to it, or he was gonna start concluding.
Thank you, Quaku, Ash, and Miss Action. Yeah, my final. I thought this is my final note I'm gonna be sharing. This part where Dr. Bobby Wright is discussing how the United States government, basically the way it maintains and so-called helps drug addicts is very, very fascinating, and it's not something I was aware of. But it just goes to show like how they treat just the stark differences in between how they treat black people versus white people. This is from page 7. In the fields of mental health and drug abuse, whites are at their psychopathic best. The United States government's position on drug users is that addicts are cured when they cease antisocial behavior, regardless of how long they have to be maintained on methadone or other drugs. Dr. Jerome Jaffe and Edward Sinay, the czars of the U.S. drug abuse program, with the assistance and protection of black addicts and ex-addicts, have created one of the most destructive programs in the black community. The methadone maintenance program, the United States government is the largest supplier of drugs to addicts in the black community. Sinay takes position that black addicts should not be given placebos or just plain orange juice. If sexually frustrated suburban white housewives can be given sugar pills rather than real drugs, why can't black addicts be given orange juice without methadone, since they cannot tell the difference? Sinay states that giving black addicts pure orange juice without methadone is unethical. Therefore, it can be deduced that doctors such as Sinay believe that it is an honorable act to give blacks drugs. But this is just very like horrifically fascinating that, you know, they won't give black people like, you know, proper medicine when it's needed without black people jumping through crazy hoops and whatnot. But when you're a drug addict, a black drug addict, instead of like helping to get you completely clean, they will help you to maintain your addiction in the way that they see fit. Just super it's evil. We're dealing with a truly evil system. And I'm just gonna take it back to what Action said in the beginning. One of the first things she said about Dr. Bobby is right, and how he thinks the only way to solve this problem is with violence. And I certainly would agree that counter violence is definitely going to be needed to solve this problem. Counter violence in all areas of people activity, and simply the thought of solving this problem is counter violence. It's attempting to counter this evil, exhausting problem. And that's all I will be sharing with today. I will pause and see if other folks like to chime in. If not, we will be concluding. I want to thank everyone for participating and sharing their notes. We will be here next week to discuss the second chapter of psychopathic racial personality, and that will be discussing black suicide. Lynching by any other name is still lynching. CRWS signing out.